Hello to all viewers, hello to everyone. I am a messenger and a true servant of the Almighty. On November 29, 2019, the Almighty will visit the earth to judge every living thing. On that day, every living thing will be given life or death. The Almighty has caused me to see who I am and to know that I am a real descendant of the house of Jacob. This video is part 6 of a series of videos that covers everything in the book of Genesis from chapter 1 to chapter 50 and is titled The Book of Genesis Unsealed and Untold. With all the confusion removed, with all the allegories removed, in these series of videos you will hear the truth according to the Almighty, according to what the Almighty commanded the house of Jacob to keep recorded. Part 5 of my video series ended with the murder of Abel by his brother Cain. So I will continue where I left off. Let's begin video number 6. After the death of Abel, the Almighty came to Cain and asked, "What way is Abel? Where is your brother Abel?" Cain answered, saying, "I have not considered. He has not showed himself. I do not know where he is. I do not care where he is, so I cannot advise you. Am I to treasure him in my memory? Am I to wait for him and watch over him? Am I to guard and preserve him? Am I my brother's keeper?" The Almighty responded, saying, "I hear your brother's voice from the earth. I hear the sound of your brother's voice as his blood is being shed. I hear the sound of his blood dropping to the ground, and his cry for help cries to me. By the strength and power of your hands, a gaping hole has been torn into the earth. This gaping hole in the earth has received your brother's body and blood, and you covered over the gaping hole that received your brother's body and blood. Now you will be greatly loathed in the land. I have laid you under a bitter curse, and you will be made to be a bitter curse throughout the whole earth. Now, when you labor upon the ground, its increase will change. When you labor upon the ground, it will not give you its strength, nor its wealth. Afterwards, if you try a second time to labor upon the ground, it will not give you an excess. If you cause someone to be your bondman or your servant, and you cause them to labor upon the ground will not produce an increase for you. Afterwards, if you cause them to try a second time to labor upon the ground, the earth will not be permitted to provide you with more than enough. You will be a fugitive, moving to and from upon the whole earth. You will aimlessly wander backward and forward like a staggering drunkard. You will be disturbed and unstable upon the whole earth. You will be a vagabond, because I, the Almighty, will cause you to wander through the territories and countries to the ends of the earth. I will cause you to be tossed about the inhabitants that are in the land of the living. The people will judge you as a fugitive, and you will tremble like leaves shaking from the wind. They will taunt you with no pity. You will disappear and become a drifter upon the earth. Cain replied to the Almighty, saying, "This day you have driven me away from my family's land. This day you have divorced me and put me away. This day you have cast me away from my possession. This day you have expelled me from the honor of your presence. Now you will secretly hide your purpose for me from me. Therefore, I will hide myself from your anger. I will hide myself away from your purpose. I will hide myself away from your sight. Because I will be an unstable fugitive wandering to and from upon the earth, and I will wander aimlessly through the territories and countries to the ends of the earth. I will be tossed about the inhabitants in the land of the living. I will be pitiful and moan within myself. Therefore it will come true. Everyone I encounter will detect me. Everyone I encounter will have learned about me. Those that seek me out will kill me with their hands. They will look for me to put me to death. They will murder me. They will make a slaughter of me. I feel the guilt of my sin. I see the perversity of my sin. I understand the depravity of my sin. I understand the consequences of my sin. And the punishment for my sin is greatly distinguished by you, and it is of the greatest importance to you. My punishment is very sore and of the greatest intensity. Therefore, I declare my punishment is greater than I can carry. My punishment is greater than I can endure. My punishment is greater than I can contain. I cannot respect the punishment you have given me. I cannot accept the punishment you have given me. The Almighty responded, saying, Whoever kills you, Cain, will suffer complete vengeance. As their punishment, complete vengeance will be taken in blood. Then of a miracle the Almighty caused a distinguishing mark to come upon Cain. To be remembered as proof of his warning, the Almighty fixed that mark to remain upon Cain unless someone fails to know about it, except someone fails to see it, and makes a slaughter of him. Cain departed away from the presence of the voice of the Almighty, and Cain wandered aimlessly as a vagabond. To the east he wandered to the end of the earth. He found a land of wilderness. It was a land inhabited by wanderers and those who were exiled. Cain inhabited the land of Nod. This was a home to those with no land of their own, and Cain found a female to be his wife. She was a human female of the species of Bahama, a human female of animal transformation. She was a great mistress. As Cain had sexual affections with her, Cain built a guarded city of excitement, terror, and anguish. Cain's wife became pregnant with a child. At the time of delivery, in distress, she labored and brought forth a child. Of wicked behavior, Cain invited and chose people to preach to. He preached the reputation of the city to them. He preached the honor of the city to them. He brought his newborn son before his guests and all those whom he invited. According to his honor, reputation, glory, and authority, Cain named his son Enoch, or Hanok. Before all his guests, Cain proclaimed his son's lineage, and named the city after his son. And unto Enoch was born Irad. Irad fathered Mehujael. Mehujael fathered Methushael. Methushael fathered Lamech. Lamech had possession of 2 women to be his wives. They were females of the human species of Bahama. They were females of animal transformation, and both resembled women by appearance. His first wife was named Adah. His second wife was named Zillah. Adah gave birth to Yaval. Yaval was respected and honored as the originator of selling livestock. He sold cows, sheep, and goats and herds for personal possession to those that settled down in tents. He sold livestock to those who remained living in tents in the wilderness. His brother's name was Yuval. He was respected and honored as the originator of those that could manipulate musical instruments. He was one of those that could take a musical instrument like a flute or a reed pipe and skillfully overlay its sound with another musical instrument like a harp or an organ. But he was one of those who defiled music. Zillah gave birth to Tuval Cain. He was a hammerer. He hammered out swords and sharpened the edges of them. He was a craftsman of every sharp-edged tool made of metal. His lust was in idolatry. He made idols of brass, bronze, copper, and iron. He was dubious in character, and he could not be trusted. He made weapons of iron and used the strength of those weapons to oppress. The sister of Tuval Cain was Naamah. Now Lamech spoke to his wives Adah and Zillah, saying, You wives of Lamech, listen to me and pay attention to what I have to say. Listen to me, because I have killed a man. I have ruined a man's life. I have murdered a man to my own ruin. I have killed a son of apostasy. He had a black and blue mark with a mark of stripes on his skin. Now this is to my own death. If Cain is to be avenged completely, then truly for me, Lamech, the powerful, vengeance will be taken completely on the person that ruins my life. Now during this time, the first man for the species of Ish went into his wife again with sexual affections. She conceived and gave birth to a son. She chose and invited guests to preach to. She spoke to them about the Almighty and declared the lineage of her son. She brought her son before them, and she spoke to her guests, saying, The Almighty has considered me and appointed me a child of good moral quality, in place of my child Abel, whom my firstborn son Cain murdered. The Almighty has appointed certain descendants of this child to be for his own righteousness. And of this same seed of descendants, the Almighty has appointed a practitioner of his own righteousness. She called the name of her son Sheth. Now the first man for the species of Ish had a life. He got sick, nourished himself, and was restored to health. He got discouraged, he rested, and he was revived. He became weary, he rested, and he was refreshed. He sustained himself and lived prosperously. He lived 130 years, then fathered a son after his own manners. This son looked like him. The first man for the species of Ish chose and invited guests to preach to. He preached about the Almighty to them. He declared the lineage of his son to them and called his son's name Sheth. After he fathered Sheth, the first man for the species of Ish fathered more sons and daughters, up until he was 800 years old. The first man for the species of Ish lived a total of 930 years. As a penalty for neglecting of wise conduct and good morals, he died prematurely. Suddenly, he was put to death by a warlock magician of necromancy. Sheth fathered a son when he was 105 years old. Sheth chose and invited guests to preach to. He preached about the Almighty to them. He declared the lineage of his son to them and called his son name Eosh. Then men began to dishonor the covenant that comes from the Almighty. They began to treat the Almighty's covenant as a common thing, like it was no better than any other. Therefore men began to pollute themselves and violate the honor of the Almighty. Men began to play defiled music and create defiled plays. Men had begun to profane the authority and the reputation of the Almighty. Men made the honor and glory of the Almighty to be a common thing. And men began to pierce, wound, and kill themselves. Men began to sexually prostitute themselves, and men began religious, sexual rituals. Men began to proclaim themselves as chosen to preach the name, the honor, the reputation, the glory, and the authority of Elohim. They began to name themselves by an Elohim. They summoned themselves with music and began to read aloud the authority and reputation of the Elohim. They chose to appoint honor and glory to the reputation of the Elohim, to be a memorial and monument. Men began to call upon the name of Baal. After he fathered Eosh, Sheth fathered more sons and daughters until he was 807 years old. Sheth lived a total of 912 years. As a penalty for neglecting wise conduct and good morals, Sheth died prematurely. Suddenly he was put to death by a warlock magician of necromancy. Sheth's son Eosh lived 90 years. Then he fathered Canaan. After he fathered Canaan, Eosh had more sons and daughters until he was 815 years old. Eosh lived for a total of 905 years. As a penalty for neglecting wise conduct and good morals, he died prematurely. He was put to death by a warlock magician of necromancy. Canaan lived for 70 years. Then he fathered Mahalalel. After he fathered Mahalalel, Canaan fathered more sons and daughters until he was 840 years old. He lived a total of 910 years. As a penalty for neglecting wise conduct and good morals, he died prematurely. Suddenly he was put to death. Canaan's son, Mahalalel, lived 65 years, and he fathered Yared. Mahalalel lived a total 895 years. As a penalty for neglecting wise conduct and good morals, suddenly he was put to death by a warlock magician of necromancy. Mahalalel's son, Yared, lived 162 years. Then he fathered Con-ok. After he fathered Con-ok, Yared had more sons and daughters. Yared lived a total of 962 years. As a penalty for neglecting wise conduct and good morals, he died prematurely. Suddenly he was put to death. He was killed by a warlock magician of necromancy. Con-ok lived 65 years, and he fathered Methuselah. Con-ok grew to be great with the Almighty. He lived according to the Almighty. He walked about, and he wandered to and from different places, talking with the Almighty, and talking to others about the Almighty. He did not die, but he was taken out of the land of the living. The Almighty chose him, and accepted him, then carried him away to be his own possession. As lightning flashed about, Con-ok departed away with a whirlwind from the Almighty. Con-ok's son, Methuselah, lived 187 years. Then he fathered Lamech. After he fathered Lamech, Methuselah fathered more sons and daughters until he was 782 years old. Methuselah lived a total of 969 years. As a penalty for neglecting wise conduct and good morals, Methuselah died prematurely. Suddenly he was put to death. He was killed by a warlock magician of necromancy. Lamech lived 82 years and fathered a son of the Almighty's righteousness. Lamech chose and invited guests to preach to. He preached about the Almighty. He declared his son's lineage, and he called his son's name Noah. He spoke to his guests, saying, "This child of mine will sigh deeply and repent to the Almighty to comfort himself. This child of mine will comfort us concerning our work that comes from the Almighty. This child of mine is our comfort concerning our pain, strength, and hardship that we have put forth to accomplish the work that comes from the Almighty. He is our comfort, because the whole ground of the earth and its rulers have been made to be a bitter curse to the Almighty. This child of mine will suffer grief and pity himself, yet he will have compassion. He will comfort himself in the work that comes from the Almighty. For an act of judgment that comes from the Almighty, this child of mine will labor to make a product of deliverance. He will accomplish the work that comes from the Almighty. This child of mine will receive the mercy and grace that comes from the Almighty." After he fathered Noah, Lamech fathered more sons and daughters until he was 595 years old. Lamech lived a total of 777 years. As a penalty for neglecting wise conduct and good morals, he died prematurely. Suddenly, he was put to death. He was killed by a warlock magician of necromancy. The species of mankind began to multiply and become many. They began to multiply and become numerous. And when the species of mankind became exceedingly great in number upon the earth, the daughters of men began to be of wicked behavior. The daughters of men brought forth iniquity with the sons of Elohim. The sons of Elohim are the sons of injustice. They believed they were of the constellation of Orion. They accepted themselves as fugitives who had judged or who had been judged and exiled by the Almighty. They believed they were of those who were of old, that had lost their inheritance. They believed they were of those who were of ancient time, who were overwhelmed, overthrown, and cast down as inferior, and killed out. Because the sons of Elohim are rebellious against the Almighty, the daughters of men gave their attention to them. Because the sons of Elohim are rebellious against the Almighty, the daughters of men observed them and desired to learn about them. Because the sons of Elohim are rebellious against the Almighty, the daughters of men became more appropriate toward them. Because the daughters of men were becoming more appropriate toward them, the daughters of men looked beautiful to the sons of Elohim. The daughters of men looked precious to the sons of Elohim. When the sons of Elohim saw that the daughters of men were cheerful and in favor of them, when the sons of Elohim saw that even the best daughters of men were very kind to them and ready to pleasure them, when the sons of Elohim saw that they could be prosperous with the daughters of men, on these conditions, to the sons of Elohim, the daughters of men became the apple of the eye. So the sons of Elohim appeared and presented themselves unto the daughters of men. The sons of Elohim took possession of women to be wives for themselves, of whomever they wanted. The Almighty summoned and spoke to his assembly, saying, Now mankind has went astray again. They are erring in their minds. They are committing sin ignorantly with their flesh. Indeed, mankind is deceived again. Mankind is deceived of his body. Mankind is deceived of his organ of generation. Mankind is deceived about his blood relations. Mankind is deceived and confused in knowing whether he is of humans, of man, or of animals. My spirit will not quarrel and be at strife with mankind throughout eternity, but until the end of the whole age, at the vanishing point of the whole age. My spirit will not always plead with mankind, nor will my spirit always judge and execute judgment against mankind, but until the end of the age, at the vanishing point of this age. Therefore, until the end of the whole age, until the day of trouble and troubled weather, a person's lifetime will be 120 years, or a fraction of it. In those days, as at older times, there were giants and tyrants on the earth. The daughters of men gained a good understanding of the intelligence of the sons of Elohim. The daughters of men gained a good understanding of the morals of the sons of Elohim, and how the sons of Elohim are able to prosper. In those days, there were giant bullies on the earth, in the fields, in the countries, and the nations of the world. The daughters of men gained a good understanding of the sexual nature of the sons of Elohim, and the daughters of men came to be of wicked behavior. They gave birth to children for the sons of Elohim. Those children that were of their same pedigree became giants, mighty men, strong warriors, brave leaders, and powerful tyrants, as at the beginning generations of persons in the world, whose people continued in existence until their vanishing point. Their men were mortal and of mankind. They were more dignified in their pride and more bloodthirsty. They were men of individual reputation, men of individual authority, men of individual character, and men of individual honor. They were men of fame and glory. For a memorial and a monument, they were of a name designated by their Elohim. Now the Almighty looked at the evil of mankind. He gave attention to it and considered. He distinguished the natural, the ethical, and the moral evils that were coming forth, out of mankind. He observed all their thoughts and actions, and beheld all the worst of the different individual species of persons of mankind. This is the end of part 6 of my video series, The Book of Genesis, Unsealed and Untold, that covers my manuscript titled The Almighty, the Beginning, His Creation of Mankind, His Promise to Judge Mankind, His War against the Elohim, His New World, and His Order. I am Shiloh, the last scribe for the house of Jacob. Watch my videos, follow me, and discover the recorded truth about the Almighty, His power, His glory, His honor, His reputation, His experiences with, and His message to all the individual species of persons on the earth.